Welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I'm your host, David Carr, founder of Steward, Business, where we bring amazing guests week after week on the podcast here. And we have another new guest here, Jill Heinze of Saddle Stitch Consulting. I'm excited to have her on here because we're going to get into a topic that you might not have thought about a lot of how are you developing and governing your AI? How are you building trust in your team? In really real world scenarios. Jill's not just taking this from theory. She's actually lived it out in a lot of ways. We're going to break it down. And I'm super excited, Jill, because in a world where trust is probably at an all-time low in a lot of ways, we're working together to build that up. And I'm super excited to have you break this down for us. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David. I'm so thrilled to be here. This is really a privilege for me.
Absolutely, Jill. Well, before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, I like to have our listeners, for those of that you don't know you or don't have your background. And by the way, as I like to say on our podcast, I'm connected with Jill on LinkedIn. You guys are going to put that all in the show notes so you guys can go connect with her and learn more. But Jill, in your own words, share with us your journey as a business owner, entrepreneur. You've been working and helping different organizations, different industries. Take us back to now. You're at Saddle Stitch Consulting now and doing what you're doing in the place of AI or in governance.
Yeah, so it's been a very winding path. I did not set out to be an AI governance person, believe it or not. But my career journey actually started professionally in academic librarianship. I thought I was going to be a librarian for the rest of my career. And it's a wonderful career to be in. Through being in libraries and then transitioning into doing market research and competitive intelligence, I actually ended up back in libraries managing a web team of 10 folks, developers, designers, researchers, and we had accountability at the University of Virginia Library for our web presences, different archival repositories. That really gave me the bug for technology. So I will credit that wonderful opportunity they gave me there for that. Yeah. And then I went into consulting from the library. I went into digital consulting for a major consultancy where I got to work with a huge variety of organizations, Fortune 500s, major national publishers, electric vehicle charging networks. And I love the diversity of problems. There, I really dug into user research. I was a director of user research, and that's the perspective that permeates everything I do in governance and responsible AI. But when ChatGPT hit the market and I was in that agency environment, that's when the light bulb moment hit me where I said, this is a fundamentally different technology. Like I could just feel it intuitively. And you're nodding. I was like, I think that's a universal there.
Yep.
But we were like everyone just trying to figure it out. And so in doing that, I helped persuade folks in the organization to take governance, seriously as we were charging quickly ahead. And from there, that's just what I kind of fell in love doing. And now I'm doing it on my own through Saddle Stitch as an independent consultant. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Oh no, it's great, and well, that's why I'm having you here. I mean, the Business Roundtable podcast. We're talking to business owners. We're talking to the folks on the front lines, and whether you're a business owner or you're a leader in an organization, because I know you're having to manage people and teams and how they're using this technology. And I mentioned to you before we were recording this, I was talking to another colleague today about, hey, he's working for a tech company, and they've got like 7 different lines of technology and just in their sales pipeline alone. And now we're trying to throw AI on top of that, and how do we make good human-based decisions, meaning we want to take care of the people but we also want to use AI. And there's this really swing all over the place right now that I'm seeing, Jill, and I'm really glad to have you here to unpack it as to, well, I'm going to get rid of all the people and just go AI or I'm not going to use any AI at all. Or, there's this, to me, it's like right now where we're seeing it's quite all over the place, but it's like you said, you can't avoid it. It's definitely upon us. And so either you can be proactive and engage somebody like yourself, Jill, or you can kind of maybe get left behind and you lose your competitive advantage. To me, we're recording this in January 2026. I think it's really important that we're paying attention to this.
Oh, yeah. And I thank you for saying that, because it is one of those things that just feels, oh, it's a little mundane. Oh, it's process. But, I think just given where I come from in my background, I think of it kind of like a product problem, right? Like our product in governance is to give people confidence, tools, education, guidance to deliver things in the right way. So, in my experience, the best way to do that is to really true up what it is you want to do with AI, with what's happening on the ground and where your people are today versus be in 6 months or a week, given the way the technology goes.
Yes.
But truly, it's kind of a design problem in that respect.
Well, and I love that you come from your library background, Joe, because that just makes me think, libraries are such an amazing tool of a repository of information. But if you don't have good governance, you're like, if you go to the library and you're not clear, like where to look for this, where to get the information, and repeatedly, and you have a lot of people that are coming and using this, it totally breaks down and then it becomes kind of useless. It's like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah. And it's surprising the library ethos. I mean, we care deeply about privacy. I think that really ties into when you think about governance and data flows and, what permissions, are appropriate or not. That's very much related, confidentiality, that service mindset. So there's a lot of ways in which libraries are kind of like keyed in, or that mentality has really influenced how I think about things, for sure.
I think that's really great because, again, as people are listening to you, Jill, and why have folks like yourself on the podcast, is I want folks to know you have an advocate, you have somebody that has real world experience and a different perspective that you might not have had. We've talked about AI in the past. I had a gentleman on, we were talking from a military perspective. That was his background. Was interesting, and now we're coming from a different perspective, and I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think it's a different way of understanding and approaching it, which I think it's so great to have you share this, because like you said, there's a lot of nuances. We're trying to unpack privacy. I've heard a lot of people bringing up biases of like how I've used this or how do I interact with it, and so talk a little bit about then what is this, how do we build this trust? What is this AI trust architecture as governance? Because we're talking, there's a lot of breakdown, but I think, this is where, where governance can really help us. And how do we really build this out, Jill? And let you unpack it a little bit.
Yeah. No, it really can be. And you use the example of your friend who was kind of having a band-aid approach to how they were tackling AI and governance. And that's a real true to life thing. Things are moving quickly. We have existing systems, processes. How do we just reconcile them? So I think the way that I like to start is, again, researcher hat, but really, where are we right now with this? And not just the technologies that we're using, though it is important to understand, the landscape of what tools are people, maybe bringing into the office that they haven't been maybe upfront about, not duplicitous, but yes, that happens, that shadow AI. But then also, what tools have you purchased and blessed, and like what are the requirements and around usage and so forth. So that's just really kind of taking stock of the present state, and that's just the technical side. But I also like to look at really like the human lived side. How are people feeling about adopting AI technology? I was leading a product team, and we would brainstorm what are the particular like use cases we're interested in, but like what's holding us back. And sometimes it's very qualitative, emotional considerations, like maybe I don't want to be displaced, or maybe I'm really care about this type of work and offloading it doesn't sit right with me. So those are valid perspectives. Whether or not that's where you want your organization to be, you won't be able to make change if you don't at least acknowledge where you're at now, and people won't trust that you understand where they're coming from. So that's kind of the first like trust building block, is being honest about that state.
I think that let's just be real, like you said, where they're at. There's fear, there's anxiety about this, understanding where people are at. One of the things I've heard and podcasts and just learning is like, how do we upskill our people? I think that there's not everybody's thinking this, but I think that's a positive, proactive way to how do we, from a governance perspective, and use these tools and help our people do better over the long haul, and not feel like they're just going to be cut off. Is like we've got to figure out how to, like I said, integrate this. And I think most leaders think about AI governance and they just think possibly policies or guardrails. But what I hear you saying, Jill, is you're using the language of trust and architecture, actually building this out.
Yeah.
There's a difference there. I'm hearing.
Yeah, there is a difference. And I will say policies still matter. Having a point of reference that people can all agree on, that this is like a source of truth of how in this moment we believe we should be moving forward. Like that is important. But what that document is not kind of the objective. The objective is a shared, real understanding. And that document should reflect that. And where it doesn't, and this is what I've seen, where we might set out some, very lofty goals, like, we value sustainability and environmental awareness as part of our policy, but is that translating to using smaller models or in some way really tactically carrying through to the delivery? Because that's where the rubber's meeting the road, and people will quickly sniff out if you're, pushing something up here that's just not feasible or being fulfilled, down on the front lines. Another example I like to share of a use policy that, many in your audience may be considering is that, you should not use tools to produce biased outputs. That sounds good, but the reality is these tools produce biased outputs. That's just what they do. They're based on biased data, and you have biases.
Human beings, we're all biased, right? At some level, that's just the reality.
That's the reality. But what we don't want to do is have those biases, maybe get out and seep into a product or some other deliverable that could disadvantage or harm other people. And that's really the kind of double click of thinking that your governance policy should get to and reflect that back. So people know not only this is what we want to do, but here's how we're going to be able to do that. So
that, to me, as you say that, Jill, it's I think I look at it as a positive thing. I mean, maybe people have had governance wielded against, like, we're enforcing this and this is the rules, as opposed to what I hear you saying is using it as a design, as a way of like, was this the outcome that we would like to have happen? And I think that's a different way of approaching it.
Yes, exactly. It's like a co-creation. It is. It's a product kind of fit challenge, because you don't want it to sit on paper. That's the worst thing. I mean, how much time, effort, angst, are you going to waste on that kind of? We don't have the time for that. Like, make it true, make it real, and make it simple. And you can always iterate and build. Things change all the time. But and not everyone will agree. Not everyone's going to love it, and that's part of the reality too. But we have a direction and some.
And I like how you said that it's not just on paper. It's really this ongoing. It's the outcome of these ongoing decisions, and most of these are small decisions that keep adding all up. Right? It's building that up and being intentional. And what I hear you saying, Jill, is coming alongside them, because maybe they have all these different people talking at high levels, executives and the end users and people in between, and you're like, okay, what's the reality here, and how, let's put this all together so it's not mush. It's not like, oh, somebody's got their little agenda here, I've got my little way of I want to do it. It's like helping them see the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish, because I think at least that's been my experience, Jill. You kind of get little areas and pockets. It's like, that kind of works for you, but it doesn't work with everybody else in the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and that's a great opportunity as a researcher to ask why. Why is there a disconnect? And you learn a lot about your organization. And the one thing too that comes out of these conversations is your values. And I think that is a huge part of governance as well, because we talk about bias, like, what do we even mean by that? What kind of bias should we care about? There is a values element to that. And by asking people about their concerns and drilling into where those come from, I think you learn about where your company is at versus where maybe you want them to be. So that's a huge accelerator, because no one, I mean, you can probably all relate to doing something that doesn't quite sit right with you. You're maybe not as engaged, you're not as confident. And that's not a great place for folks to be for an extended period of time. So governance helps with that.
So important. I mean, and I see this in small companies, large companies, in between, to your point. Obviously, most of the executives, the high-level folks, usually are pretty good about understanding their values, their mission, and their vision. But I think it gets diluted. They don't reinforce that. And to your point, the Agile kind of gets murky. And so, and then again, if you're using a tool like AI and it can amplify either way, and biases could be a good thing, and like, hey, this is what we adhere to. We adhere to quality. Okay, well, our bias is to quality. We don't want to have poor. When we do poor deliverables, so there's a bias there. But so can you talk through a little bit about And let's just go maybe start with the executives, because it goes down, in
Yeah.
my opinion, from them, like
Mhm.
executive AR governance in practice. What does that look like as you've been working with groups,
Mhm.
Jill, and just kind of break it down, so when they're thinking about it, maybe they haven't looked at this in a while. So you like walk me through, like, here's what, from researching, breaking it down, getting them moving in the right direction.
Yeah, so I think assuming you've done sort of that groundwork, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
talking to people or working through your managers to collect information about the tooling, the different use cases, the concerns, that really becomes a bit of your roadmap as a leadership team and by the way, that team should be very cross-functional.
Mm,
One of the things that's really critical as you're forming that governance group is that you're inviting a variety of perspectives. So yes, executive, technical leadership, security, legal, human resources, and also consider some outside folks. Depending, on your industry, your business, you may want to consider getting end users or community leaders in the mix. Diversity is a real asset, I think, in identifying the gaps in
mhm.
governance. So assuming that you've done that, then you can get your sense of the centers of gravity as to what is the most urgent thing to fix. And maybe it is simply people don't know what tools are designated for use and what are not acceptable, and what kinds of information you can put into these systems
Yes.
and what you should avoid. And if that's the main thing, great place to start. It's
Mhm.
not tackling and boiling the ocean and taking this defensive posture. Is being strategic, and it's being tied to the needs of the organization. That'll look different for everyone, but that's, to me, the great way to get started, so that your words have some meaning rooted in that truth.
So, Jill, when you come alongside, yeah, I think that's great. I like that you emphasize, getting this diversity of thoughts. Maybe it doesn't everyone
Mhm.
agree,
Right.
because sometimes we like consensus, but that's not always going to get consensus. But at least get the perspectives of, like, and then is that where you come in, Jill, and you kind of help distill that down of, like, okay, this is what this is what I'm hearing. This is where and how we're going to then put this into place
Yes,
moving
I
forward.
definitely perform that facilitator role
Yeah.
in that. But one thing I neglected is that we do some foundational work to,
Mhm.
organize a charter or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be a lot of overhead, but how are we going to
Yeah.
work together? And when we may not decide, who is the decider?
Yeah.
Accountability is one of the key parts of governance. Is to say it's not just we as an organization own,
Yes.
the kind of, it's this person for these kinds of things, and these are the risks that need to bubble up to this place, and being specific about that.
Mhm.
So they're having some kind of operational, like, document, like how are we going to engage with one another, helps
Oh,
smooth
I think
that.
that's yeah, that's super important, because I could see Jill being fuzzy. I mean, let's just take AI out of the question. I just see this happen in organizations, and when I'm working with leadership teams, of like, where does my responsibility begin and end, and where's the other person? And to your point earlier, there's a gap here. I think it ends here, and here, and then there's like, well, now this is kind of no man's land. Who's going to go in there? You
Yes,
know?
and I'll tell you what I think works really well to figure that out, because that can be difficult. And I'll say I struggled early on. I hadn't created a governance group at my previous consultancy before, so that was my where I cut my teeth. And
Yes.
that's why gathering those use cases can really be an accelerator in that, because otherwise you can kind of imagine, oh, all kinds of risks and dangers and things that could go astray. But really, if people are using this tool to do this thing, and that's kind of mostly what we're concerned about, maybe it's not user facing, or it is, you can account for that, and then kind of play out, okay, what could go astray here? And if that happens, how might we respond? And it gives people this concreteness
Mm.
about how to map out those accountabilities, rather than just doing it in the abstract. So
Uh-huh.
I found that to be a real helpful method.
Yeah, well, I would say part of that too, Joe, because as somebody that I'm looking at an organization is, getting clear as to how much risk I can take, how far can I go without, stepping out of bounds, so to speak. Because we don't. This is what at least I found, and again, I think this is unhealthy governance where it's punitive. Is if it's like, we want to understand, we want to try to create a good balance of, you know there's reasonable risk, and there's unreasonable risk.
Yeah.
Where, like, and there's some people that are like, I'm willing to take the risk. Other people are like, I won't take any risk. And it's like we gotta, like, find a right balance in there.
Yeah, and I like to really honor the organization's kind of value structure that they have rather
Mhm,
than say or prescribe, like, here's how you should think about risk. Now, I would much rather reflect it back in light of
mhm,
these use cases and that's like, does this hold true for you, at least, for now?
mhm.
Because, yeah, some people just have lower risk tolerances. They have regulatory demands on them that might be different. I sometimes use this example because it just paints a maybe starker picture of difference. But you can imagine if I were in the retail space and I was using AI to facilitate consumer purchase experiences. That's one use case versus maybe a community health organization that focuses on women's health and is, looking at ways to provide clinical care through and
Mhm,
using it.
mhm.
Those are just very different cases. And so that risk profile is going to change. And knowing that can just, some risks you can parking lot and say, these are okay. Like you're doing these things, you don't really need to go through the chain. But if you're in these areas and see these examples manifest, that's when they need to rise up and people should know how to do that. So that's
That's
part of that.
that use example is so important. I was talking to a client and they're explaining to me like, hey, we're getting this new AI software we're supposed to use in processing data, but it was all rushed, and it was like we're pushing this out. Haven't quite understood when I'm supposed to use this. It's just supposed to improve my efficiency. And to your point, Jill, I don't feel like it would, as I was talking here, I didn't get clarity as to like what's the typical uses, how will we plan this
Hmm.
on a day-to-day basis, especially when you're going from zero, never having done it, and now you're going to incorporate it into your daily practice.
Yeah.
I think there's such a disconnect there.
It's huge. I've been on the end of like, okay, we're using AI, like go do. And it's like, I don't even really know how to process that. So
Hmm.
I'm with you in this rushing part, David. I wish I had a magic answer to this because you can imagine as a researcher, there's a way in which that research activities can be perceived as drags on the system.
Yeah.
Like, no, we've got to produce. And I always wonder, like, what are we rushing towards so quickly? Like
Hmm.
research can be done fast and it's not doing nothing. We're learning a ton. We are understanding the context.
Right.
I really suspect with AI and in particular agentic AI, which we're going to see really come onto the scene in this coming year, if you are unaware of the details of the workflows that you are plugging these things into, you are exposing yourself to all kinds of potential chaos. So the time that you spend is productive time learning about your systems, your workflows, where your folks are with respect to these
Right.
technologies. That's just my truth.
Well, it's funny you say that too. I was working with another client, Jill, and she was working on a report and she's like, I'm going to use AI to help me do this. And then she got stuck. And I said, I understand why you got stuck because it was the order of operations in which you were putting things into AI.
Oh,
Um, that you're not going to get, doesn't, it's like baking a cake and throwing the ingredients in the oven and you haven't mixed everything together. You're not going to get a cake. Yes, all the
yeah.
ingredients are there,
Hmm.
but you didn't do it in the right order and you missed steps. And so, you know, it AI it does catch some of these things, but it's not gonna get all of these things.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a danger of thinking it could do maybe more than it can in some cases.
It's such a mixed bag. I mean, I
Yeah.
would not want to go back to the days before I could, call on Claude or I vibe code my website and I've been able to do a lot of things I couldn't have done with my HTML skills. But, even so, it helps. I had a background in web, management and I could ask it like, hey, does this conform with accessibility requirements? And can we mask my email address? So bots I know to ask those things, but it doesn't necessarily volunteer them. So someone
Mhm.
who really doesn't have that contextual knowledge, it's a lot harder to anticipate the places where AI is hitting the mark and then what it might be omitting because there's just not that, kind of former knowledge to inform how we interact with it.
Yeah. And so there's a real and then again, why we need the governance, because if you're having people just kind of go out there and then they're getting information, and depending on what industry you're in, if you're at healthcare, financial, there's a lot of other regulations in there. I mean, I spoke last year, I kind of mentioned to you, at our local ISACA and International Internal Auditors Association. A lot of the conversation was along to the what's the like you said, what's the standards that we're going to go through and put this stuff together? Not necessarily, I mean, governance, yes, but it's more from the IT perspective and just security perspective of what does that need to look like,
Or
not
maybe
really
there's
user
a review.
experiences. Yeah, especially and again, everything shit. And what I heard was, well, there's lots of different models out there, and there's some of them are proprietary and others that are not. And it's like, well, if you're going to go with Microsoft's got their own way of doing it, so it's like, how do you make it your own,
Yeah. And do you make it? I mean, that's a strategic technical decision as well. So there's lots of things to surface that can, and maybe it's not all for your governance group to decide, by the way, but to be aware of and to make sure it is addressed by the appropriate experts, I think is another good reason to have that function.
Well, I like how you said, yes, it may feel like it's slowing you down in the research, but I don't think ultimately it keeps you from crashing. And getting that perspective so that you can make informed decisions. I come, Jill, from an environmental consulting background, and we would do a lot of surveys and research ahead of time before the project because we didn't know what was there and how that would affect the design of the project, what was going to go on, right? And so if we didn't do those things, we would be impacting natural resources and other things in an unhealthy way. And so we said, okay, look, what's going on here? Let's get this base of information. Yes, it takes time. I get it. But ultimately, and often, honestly, as an environmental consultant, it's driven by governance, by different laws, federal, state, local, because this is what we hold values. These are what we believe is important. Having, clean air and water to drink and enjoy our natural world. So again, what are those values? What's driving you? And to your point, Jill, like let's build that in a healthy way so that you're not crashing, you're not losing competitive advantage in the market. Well, I want to get a reality check here though from you, Jill. As we're bringing it home to like the SMB, the small mid-sized companies that maybe look like, I don't know, they have 25, 100, 200 people. What does that look like for them, Jill? And because as they're walking into 2026 and saying, I don't really have governance in place. It's kind of the wild, wild west.
Yeah. I think in broad strokes, it looks somewhat similar. I still think it is important to know where your employees are coming from and do that due diligence. It's important to have those use cases and those tools documented. That's kind of like, basic governance and sort of tracking. What you may be able to go a little bit lighter on, depending on your use cases, your industry, and so forth, is it a lot of documentation? Is it a lot of people involved in lots of decisions? Probably not. Probably some general use profiles, making sure that your IT folks are aware of how people are using things and how we want them to. Things like that, I think, can be expedited when you don't have as large of an organization and exposure. So, but I think that the steps, if we're imagining we are trying to design something that is of use to people, we need to know what those needs are, and we need to true that up with whatever, a document or two about how they should be engaging with them. I did work for, my smaller consultancy. We just had a very simple, straightforward guide about here's the things, that you should use, and don't put company information in of this nature and so forth. So I don't think it has to be complex. I just think it has to be honest with how people do their work.
I think that's important for everyone to hear. It doesn't have to be overkill. It's just get essentially what is those things that we need to do based on our industry, based on, I would also, I guess, Jill, I mean, certain people have different access or certain needs. So it's like, hey, if this, I don't know, technical level 1, this is where you need. If you're technical level 2, 3, whatever, you may need more. You're right. Abilities. Yeah.
It reminded me of something that is probably going to become a factor in the future, which is that access question, important for your physical human people. And then as you get into the agentic space, also managing that and really erring towards zero trust and minimal access to things. And that is where I would encourage, smaller organizations need to really interrogate any of the third-party technologies that they're bringing on and understand what's happening with data, making sure that those systems don't have any more access than they absolutely need, because I think we're going to see this as being the next kind of risk area for folks, and I don't want those listening to fall into that category of people who
Yes, we're seeing that if you're using any kind of open AI versus, the closed AI, what I've seen, Jill, speak to this a little bit, because the closed AI typically means, there's some, you can use ones off the shelf, but if you want to create your own, that is it's going to take more effort to do that. And again, beginning with it and kind of thinking, where do you want to go with this? What's your outcome, right?
Yeah, and it's usually more than a lot of mid-size or smaller organizations are willing to take on. So and plus, now you see tools like, gosh, almost everything that we use, it seems like, has a little AI feature or button.
I know.
And asking good questions about that. Now, enterprise license, they protect people a lot more than your, maybe free things that you might experiment with, but it's still worth asking the questions about particularly data. Where is it going? Where is it being stored? And that kind of thing. Underlying models, also a really good question to ask. You brought up the point before, there are many models for many things, and they're not all equally good or secure or biased. There's lots of characteristics of these things that's available to know, but you should ask the question.
Well, and it's interesting, it seems to me like everything is moving so quickly. Well, quote unquote, this model or whatever is the best one right now, but next month it may not be the best one. I mean, it just seems like am I just imagining it? It seems like that to me, Jill.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, the foundation models are pretty baked and set until they do major updates. But yeah, there's all kinds of other models available open source that is very dynamic. And so this is why the speed part, to go back to that, I think it doesn't hurt to slow down a little bit, because you're really protecting your users, your customers, your business. And that's worth doing, rather than feeling you have to keep up with the latest and greatest. You just need to get that facility with how to evaluate what's new. I think that might even be the more important skill set, how to wade through, when to make a change, what questions to ask. That's a good place to start.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've had on the podcast, I just did one last month with a company where they do employee surveys and how they gather the data and how to anonymize this. And so I'm looking at using it as Steward Your Business, as a coach consultant. I'm evaluating, like, is this a company that I want to integrate and work with my clients, and how do they protect my clients? To asking these questions of a third party and their tool and what they're developing. I think there's some great things out there, but it's like understanding what I would say, understanding your values and what you're about, but also understanding what are the values of these companies and where they're coming from too, right? How are we ending up with them?
100%. And they're using tools, and you want to know what's going on with you. Yeah, it is an ecosystem concern. And, I think, traditional security questions are appropriate here, but I think given the pace of change, a little bit more of a double click into those questions is merited. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause there's doing say, maybe we don't want to do work with that company or that AI company based on the way that their values or the way they want to do things or use the data. And so I think there's real questions around that. And again, it goes back to governance, like, who do we want to be working with? What do we value? How do we be intentional about that?
Yeah. And who decides? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we could definitely go on longer, Jill. I love this conversation, and I want to have you come back. Maybe we'll have a bigger conversation on this with a few other guests, because I feel like there's so much here to unpack. But if a leader, I want to ask you, if a leader's listening today, and we want to encourage them and to be more responsible with their AI, what should they do? What should they consider, Jill? That, hey, I should be paying attention to this, just as an individual. In the organization, whether the business owner or leader, that they can take a step with AI this week, just be more considerate about how they're interacting when using it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good answers to that question. The one that just kind of comes to mind, I might encourage people to think about, is that oftentimes we have a little bit of an intuition about these things. Something might not sit right, or we, maybe we're throwing things at the walls. We say, go ahead and pick this up. I think if one focuses on, you think about your values, where you're trying to go, what's the one thing that is, concerning you, keeping you up at night, weighing on your mind about getting there, and asking some good questions about where that's coming from, because that could be a signal that we need to learn more information. We need to have a policy in place. We need to, explore alternatives. So I guess at a very fundamental, easy level, like trust your instinct a little bit and don't be afraid to just like hit the pause button for a moment to, make sure we're doing things that are in alignment with how we want to do business. So that's one simple thing I can advise.
I love that, Jill. I hope everybody's hearing that and applies that, because I think slowing down, there's power in that. I personally practice some meditation at times, and slowing down and just kind of clearing my mind and stepping back a little bit to get perspective, because sometimes when we're in the midst of it, we're missing that. And I think that's really important, Jill, like you said earlier in the podcast, of asking questions and stepping back and looking at case uses and all the different parties that are involved. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. I hadn't considered that. I haven't thought about that. And that is really powerful.
Yeah. And if that's uncomfortable framing for folks, like, oh, I can't slow down, think of it as like pivoting to a different lane where you're accelerating. You're accelerating your thinking about how you can be more AI ready, more AI fluent. That is productive work. It is thought work. It is very productive work. And I actually have, and I'm happy to offer your listeners, I have a 4 AI horizons sort of framework. It's not a checklist, but it just outlines 4 different points in time, like what questions you should be asking as you go from kind of identifying your ground truth. We talked a ton about, to building your foundations, to deploying, and to sustaining that. And each one just has some frames that you can put to your problems, ask of your employees and customers. And so that could be a good starting place as well.
That's fantastic, Jill. Well, we will definitely include that in our show notes. Those of you that are listening in, if you have comments or feedback for Jill, put in our comments or message me. podcast@stewardyourbusiness.com. We take in information. We've got a lot of great new guest requests coming in, folks that really want to share, which is fantastic. Any last takeaways, Jill, as we're wrapping up the podcast here today? And again, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, I would say, just stay true to yourselves. There is a lot, there is so much hype. It is such a, in many ways, stressful exercise to keep up with it and process it and know how to do it. But, you are the boss of the AI. It is a tool to fulfill your objectives, to live your values, to make a difference in the world as you see fit. It is not there to control you, even though it feels like that sometimes, but really kind of own that and take confidence. We're all learning together, and there are lots of people who are happy to help, and we will figure it out together.
Yes. And you've got Jill here. You guys know you've got Jill as an advocate. Jill, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Of course, David. This is my pleasure. This was so much fun. Have me back with your group. I'd love it.
I absolutely will. You guys, of course, we love you when you guys like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Follow along, share with your network, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, wherever you're finding us. Thank you for being along this journey with us. We're excited as we go in 2026. When you catch this episode, if you've missed past episodes on other topics, we'd love to have you go back and listen to them. Until next time, be well. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.